So I'm here with Klaus, the director of the Flugt Refugee Museum in Denmark. Hello, Klaus. How are you?
Hello, very well, thank you.
Here.
Good to see you. Thank you.
And congratulations for the recent award, the Luigi Micheletti 2023 award. And that's a great achievement, which also validates all the work that you've been doing at your museum. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to achieve that award. Of course it is.
So I'd like to start with asking you for a brief description of what the Flugt is all about.
Flugt Refugee Museum of Denmark is a quite new museum. It opened only 2 years ago. It is a museum situated in a former refugee camp. It used to be, the building we are sitting in, it used to be a refugee camp after World War II. But it holds basically two stories, to make it very short. It holds the story of this original refugee camp that was here 80 years ago, almost. And it holds the story of the last 100 years of refugees crisis around the world. So it is basically an international museum on the issue of refugees, on flights, and on the questions related to refugees.
What is the history of your award-winning museum? How did it come into being, and what were the aims? I know that you did mention this, but perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about your ethos, your identity.
Yeah, you see, from 1945 to 1949, this place was a refugee camp. For Danish standards, a very big refugee camp, actually the biggest refugee camp that was ever in Denmark. It's the refugees staying here were German refugees, Germans fleeing from the horrors of the war on the eastern frontier in World War II. A quarter of a million German refugees came to Denmark and were situated different places in Denmark, and among other places here in Oksbøl, which became to be the biggest of the camps, and after that, historically, the biggest refugee camp in Denmark ever. In 1949, the refugees left and the camp was demolished, and almost all traces of the camp was erased. There were only very few buildings left, and the traces in a forest was planted on the former refugee camp ground. But in the forest, there were more traces than most people just could see. They were out there, the traces. So for many years, of course, having a museum here in the municipality of Varde, we have been collecting stories on this refugee camp after World War II, because it is a big part. It's a world history taking place in our small municipality. So we've been collecting stories for I think 20 or 30 years. We've been collecting stories, and then 12 years ago, it all of a sudden got possible for us to get one of the buildings. Actually, the hospital of it has been used for a youth hospital for many years, and now it was to be demolished as well. But then we came and said, hey, perhaps it's the right time to make a museum on this story. And then when we were to make this museum, it became very clear for us that if we should tell the story of refugees in 1945, we of course had to address the present day refugee questions as well, since the number of refugees worldwide today is far bigger than it was by the end of World War II. So we decided to make this present day, really, refugee museum in a historical setting, namely the hospital of the old refugee camp. And then it turned out, when we dived into the issue, that the forest didn't just hit few traces of the camp, but actually when the camp was demolished in the 1950s and the forest was planted, they used all the roads in the former refugee camp. So it meant that when we started working on this, actually the entire plan of the refugee camp in scale 1:1 was present in the forest. So you can actually take a walk in the forest and in the refugee camp at the same time. So we had this.
Amazing.
Yeah, I really felt it as an amazing opportunity. We had got a historic building, a historic setting, the exact refugee camp, and the possibility of taking visitors into it, and of course the idea of creating a relevant museum, making the connection from 1945 till today on the refugee issue.
Amazing. I really love what you said about stories, that you are collecting stories, and we will come back to that. So, Klaus, what do you think were the particular qualities then, or innovations of your project that impressed the European Museum Academy's Luigi Micheletti Award 2023 jury then?
Yeah, I think basically the storytelling of our museum, telling this as personal stories. We have been very precise in saying that we want to. When you hear about refugees today, when the media has got many stories on refugees, you always hear about huge numbers, hundreds of thousands, millions, and it's that's the way we face refugees in media in Northern Europe. That's as huge numbers. We wanted to tell that we wanted to turn numbers into persons. So we wanted to make this really to use the personal stories to create this museum. So I think what we had very positive response on from the jury of the Luigi Micheletti Award was the storytelling, and perhaps also as a very innovative part, the storytelling in the forest, where we have created an audio tour where you actually have a walk in the refugee camp in 1946. But of course, you're walking in the forest, but creating a narrative and a storytelling that makes you feel that you are in the camp in 1946.
Okay, so it's the connection between the past and the present in a way as well.
Yeah, and of course, I think you're right. And then, of course, using personal stories, telling personal stories, of course, makes it so much easier for the visitors to attach to the story, to understand the story.
I'm sure that your project was not an easy challenge. Can you share with us your difficulties and also the positive experiences you went through?
Yeah, you don't want to hear about building a museum in COVID crisis. We don't want to talk about this. Oh. That was major. That was just small.
Huge challenge.
Sure. We started building when it was COVID crisis. 3 months after we started building, the war in Ukraine began, which made all the difficulties on building, getting material, and all the uncertainty, but also, of course, underlined the relevance of the museum, since while we were making the museum, it, of course, was important for us to address the refugees of the Ukrainian war as well. But I think if I should point at one big issue, then it is, of course, dealing with an issue that is highly political and delicate, because the question of how to deal with refugees, how should we address this, is a highly political question in Denmark, as in other questions in other countries. So of course we had many discussions on how to deal with this. I've got many colleagues telling me, just saying, don't do it. Don't make a refugee museum. It will be too difficult to do. But my point of view was that, okay, if it's difficult, then it might be important. And of course, museums should address important and relevant questions. So, but of course, it took a lot of discussions in the museum. How do we deal with this? Not to be at one political end of the spectrum, but really to address this and say that we have got a huge problem here. More than 100 million people around the globe are on the flight right now. So it's one of the very big problems of present day. How do we address it? How do we open up the visitors' eyes to see that this is a huge problem that we have to address together around the world? So we took this decision to say, okay, we've got a United Nations made a protocol on refugees. They have got a declaration on refugees. Denmark was one of the first countries to sign it in 1952. So let's stand on that base, saying we have got a worldwide problem. It should be solved in an international context. We can address this from the UN perspective. I think that was that was one. May just add another one. The other one was, of course, working with personal stories, because then you have and present day personal stories. We have got interviews with the refugees who have got their story very, very and the flight perhaps very close to them. How do we handle this in a respectful way so they are not exposed more than necessary? And then finally, you just addressed before then that I said we collected stories, because we of course collect stories and objects. Museums also host objects, but for natural reasons, a refugee museum doesn't hold many objects. I think when you think about it, people who are fleeing, they do not bring a lot with them when on their flight, and what they bring often is of highly personal value to them. It might be some that brings memories of the country. So, and that brings me to the positive side. I think what really touched me was the generosity of these refugees sharing their stories with us and giving some of these precious objects. It could be a plastic bag that they had carried with them, or it could be a summer dress their mother was wearing on the flight or something like that. Very personal items. But I think generosity is the very best word to say that they shared their personal stories. That was positive. And of course, on the opening day, when Her Majesty the Queen was here, the ministers from different countries, and to seeing the refugees who share their stories, being happy to say, this is my story that has come to a museum. I think that was
amazing.
Amazing, really, it was.
So I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the practical side of things. For example, you mentioned risks and political implications. What were those? Just perhaps one or two examples. And can you share with us how you handled these?
Yeah, of course. I think the problems were bigger in theory before we started than they turned out to be, because we were very aware that we should be precise in our communication, not saying that this is a museum dedicated to one NGO or one political party, but to the issue, to taking the UN point. So I think the political discussion was very small, really. What we also was afraid about was, of course, that could be someone who didn't like the museum, who would come out here to do something stupid on the museum or on the employees. That there could be some sort of very critical issues, and we have only had very few of these. We made a special exhibition on the Ukrainian refugees, and we had some comments, also people coming out here protesting that we were sympathizing with the Ukrainian refugees, since of course it was pro-Russian propagandists who wanted to tell us there was not a war in Ukraine. It was so these it was lies we were telling, and these, of course, this is a risk, telling current history. It always is. And if we tell stories with political interest, this can be so. But I think the problems has been smaller than we feared them to be. Isn't that what life is about? The problems always often turn out to be smaller than you fear them to be.
It's one thing anticipating a possible problem, but it's another thing when you get there.
Yeah, and you have solutions for it, of course, when you get there. Sorry.
Please, one other practical questions about the way you connected the site-specific refugee stories to the history of refugees in general. How did you go about it? You mentioned storytelling, but in practical, we had to visit your museum.
When you come to visit the museum, and I hope to see you someday, you will be very welcome.
Have to do that.
And you will see that the museum there are two wings in the museum, the two buildings actually connected by a foyer. But in the one wing, we tell the general stories of refugees throughout the last 100 years. Where were the big crises? Why do people flee? How do they flee? How is it living as a refugee in this limbo you live in when you cross a border, come through a refugee camp, but you're still uncertain if you can stay or must go again? How is it living here in the limbo, the uncertainty? How is it setting new routes when you either go back to where you came from, or you have to set new routes in a new country? And how is it living afterwards? As saying, once I was a refugee, how does it affect people? So that's one way. In this wing of the museum, we combine all different historical refugee crises, meaning that the German refugees coming here in 1945, of course, is part of it, but it can be as well Iraqi, Libyan, Ukrainian, Syrian, Somalian refugees coming here, telling their personal stories. And what most visitors experience when they go in there is that, of course, all the persons are different, but many of their stories are alike. If the story of being a refugee has got so many similarities across the world. And then in the other wing of the museum, we tell specifically the story about the refugee camp here in Oksbøl in 1945. And then you are sent into the forest. There's just outside where I'm sitting here, there's a model of the refugee camp. You can see the size of the camp. You can get an overview of it, see I'm here, and then you can see the tour you're going to take. And then when you go into the forest, you've got a headset and an audio guiding you on your tour. And when you enter the forest, you walk through a time tunnel that turns time backwards from today, and you can hear that in your devices that got like small media clips. You've got the landing on the moon. You've got ABBA tunes. You've got all these. So you're
going back in time.
And when you got back in time, you are entering in 1946, and you are welcomed by a person in your device saying, "Hello, welcome to the Oksbøl camp. My name is Alice. I'm a nurse at the hospital. I will show you." And then she will guide you through the camp, tell you where to go. And she is meeting persons in the forest, introducing you to them, and they are telling their stories on the flight, on how it is to live in Oksbøl, on their dreams of going back. So when you've had this tour, and I think the visitors have got a very good experience of how was it staying in Oksbøl from 1945. All the traumas they kept with them coming to the camp, all the worries they had about the future, and of course the difficulties of living in a very close together in the camp, but mainly the adults' worries about have I got a home to go back to? Is my husband still alive? How will my life be from here on? So I think the museum basically combines this indoor experience where we tell about refugees at all time, the refugee camp in Oxbow, and an outdoor experience where you sort of are sent back in time to the refugee camp in 1946.
That sounds very inspiring. Congratulations. One last question for you, Klaus. To what extent then, with all the amazing work that you've been doing, to what extent and in what ways then do you feel you can impact the public debate, specifically the public debate on the refugee issue?
Well, actually, I've been telling you again, that we have got two stories, but we have actually got three reasons for the museums, or three topics we concentrate on. It's, of course, the general story of refugees, telling the audience that they are here, that it's a big issue. Diving into the Oxbow stories, letting people know that here's a big story. But the third reason of making the museum was to make a meeting point, to make a room, a safe room for discussion and debate, and for meetings, because I think, and this is a very big, an important thing for me. I think museums are more important today than they have ever been. I think in a world of, in a time of fake news, or the feeling that the world is falling apart, we are dividing, we are discussing, we are fighting more than we are discussing. I think it's important. What museums can do is to bring the world together. I think when you come in as a visitor here, if the museum works well, you can, one, think, there is a world. It is connected. We have got connections, even though social media might tell something different. And I have got a place in the world. I can make a difference. It's important for me to be in this world. And we want to give the visitor this experience to go out again. And therefore, we will have discussions, debates here. We will have big public meetings, because I think it is important that we meet face to face. It is important that we discuss we can argue, we can discuss political issues, but we should do it rather face to face than on social media. And museums are one of the very good and safe places to do so.
That's a very inspiring answer to my question. So, Klaus, it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you. And I would like also to thank you for your time, and wishing you the best for all the amazing things that you are doing at Flucht.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.